Hey everyone, welcome to the Hobby Grotto. Today I'm going to show you how to paint my favourite Legion of Chaos Space Marines, Word Bearers. I'm starting this Marine with a technique that saves time and can be applied to a wide variety of models, and that is a silver base coat. The first overbrush is a darker silver, and then we follow this up with a dry brush of a light silver so that all the metallic bits will be sorted before we get on with the rest of the model. I find this particularly handy for Chaos Space Marines as there's so much armor trim. This sorts all that out, and then we can come back after that to fill in the rest of the armor. You can of course spray the silver on with an airbrush or rattle can, but I like the shading and highlights you build from going over a black undercoat with a couple of silver dry brushes. If you find it easier to paint the trim after the armor, simply skip this whole step and move straight onto the red. With all the metallics complete, I'm now coming through with Khorne red and painting the armor, and you're probably going to find that this is the most time consuming part of the whole process, but stick with it because once this is done, we're going to have painted so much of the mini, and they're almost going to be table ready really. While I'm painting a word bearer, of course, this whole painting the armor after the trim technique can be used on a variety of different Chaos Marines. You can even go over a gold base instead of silver for those legions with a bronze or gold trim. It pays to be careful here, but if you do splash over onto any of the metallics, it can be touched up with Iron Warriors, or if it's only a tiny mistake, we can just fix it later with some metal highlights, which is particularly useful for the armor trim because it's hard to avoid some splash over on the smaller details. Don't worry about that too much. Because this is such a prominent colour, and we are painting over metallics, I like to come back and give everything a second coat to make sure it's nice and consistent and haven't missed any areas, which always happens somewhere, you know what it's like. There are lots of assorted areas of bone, horns and cloth on Chaos Space Marines. I'm just going to give all these areas a base coat of XV88, which is just such a useful colour for anything like this. Going over a metallic or black undercoat, bone is going to struggle a bit. So this gives us something to build off. Most mid-range to light browns will work fine in this role. A couple more details like belts and holsters, I'm going to paint Rhinox hide. This is just to break up the brown a bit. There's already a fair amount of XV88 on the mini, but you could always go with black for details like this. They aren't focal points, so it really doesn't matter too much. Now you can of course paint the eye lenses any colour, but I think a bright green works best to contrast with the red armor, and Moot green has a nice vibrant tone. With everything else base coated, it's time to paint the black parts, and you can just use regular black here. I like to mix a very dark grey rather than straight black, so it's not quite as stark, but either way works for this. These kinds of bits aren't focal points, you just want to get a nice dark colour to break up the rest of the mini and create some contrast. Now this is of course unique to this model, but I thought for the sake of completeness, I'd include a shot of the Genestealer purple being applied to the tongue-like appendage there, very important. My favourite part, shading the miniature with Nuln oil. Although any black or brown wash would work fine here, use what you're comfortable with. The most important part is of course to make sure that there isn't any heavy pooling on the miniature. Move that around with your brush before it dries. If you're just going for a tabletop standard, this is a pretty good level, but for the next stage, I like to come back through and repaint all the base coats while leaving the shading from the wash visible where it needs to be. Washes are indeed fast, but a trade-off of this is that they can sometimes muddy or stain your colours where you don't want any shading, particularly on brighter colours. Coming back through with your base coats restores some vibrancy, while also building some more contrast with the shading, and just generally neatens everything up. All paint has a level of transparency, so you can even play with the layers here and add some more coats to the raised areas. This will build light and shade on the mini. Just make sure your paint is nice and thin, that's the key to layers. Because washes mainly affect brighter colours with the staining, you can often skip repainting dark colours if you're in a hurry, but I just do them all anyway because I like the subtle shading you build from another coat or two of the base colour. You can also use this stage to change any colours that aren't working on the mini, seeing as you now have more of a complete picture of how everything is coming together. If there are any areas where you missed with wash or didn't get enough shading, you can come back and apply some more wash or stronger black lining to specific areas. One of the main reasons I like word bearers is because I love the idea of these dark crusading paladins, full of zeal, kind of the exact opposite of Space Marines, but don't forget to let me know in the comments why you're a fan of the word bearers. To sort out the bone and cloth, I'm using the same mix of XV88 and Ushabti bone, about 50-50, but to add a bit of difference between these two materials, I'm going to take the bone parts further with some white highlights later on. This is a great way to save time by keeping a limited colour palette over the miniature, while still adding some visual difference. Of course, for your own minis, you can paint the cloth bits any colour. I think purples can look great against the red colour scheme, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for this tutorial. I do quite like the look of a browny tan colour for the cloth to simulate leather or skin. I did also consider going for black horns here. I'm very fond of dark coloured horns with certain colour schemes, but I thought they might reduce the visual interest of the face and helmet area here, though definitely food for thought. And don't forget, if you're enjoying the video, please consider subscribing to the channel or even dropping a like. That really does help spread the word of the Hobby Grotto. I'm also going to come through quickly and add some highlights to the brown areas. You can use any light brown for this. I like to mix some bone in with my previous tone of Rhinox hide to create a faded leathery look, but if you're speed painting you can even just skip this step entirely. None of these areas are focal points and they have already got some shading from the wash anyway. I thought the claws are looking a bit boring in plain old black, so to jazz the mini up a bit, I'm adding some subtle blue highlights to them. This is mini specific of course, but it does give the opportunity to show how another colour like blue can work with the word bearer's colour scheme. I don't know if it's the same for you, but black areas always look a bit unfinished to me. It's time to add some highlights to the armour, and I've got a 50-50 mix of Khorne red and Evil Sunz Scarlet going here. You could also use regular Mephiston red. It's going to be a very similar colour, but I like to mix these highlights so they blend in more with my final highlights of pure Evil Sunz Scarlet, and also I think the Scarlet adds a bit more punch to the red. It's best to keep these highlights thin, but sometimes when you're painting this isn't always possible, so don't forget that after you've applied the highlights you can always come back with your base colour and make further adjustments. Very handy for the times you go a bit heavy with the brush. I've mentioned this before in my videos, but you don't need to get carried away with highlighting. You can go mad trying to highlight every edge, but particularly for gaming miniatures, I just do strategic highlights, mainly concentrated on the focal points. I like a vibrant miniature. I think it makes them stand out more on the tabletop, but if you find these highlights too bright, you can also mix some bone with Khorne red and highlight with this instead. This will create a much more subdued look with a paler tone to all the highlights. To finish the armour, I'm just coming back through with some Ironbreaker and tidying up any areas of the silver trim where other colours may have splashed onto it in previous steps. You can also use this stage to add some subtle highlights to the trim too. And there we have a word bearer ready to spread the word. Thanks for watching everyone. Why don't you check out some of these other videos, and we'll see you next time on the Hobby Grotto.